Good evening. It's so good to be together on this Lord's Day evening. On the night of Jesus' betrayal, on the night before his crucifixion, he went away with what seems to be three of his best friends in the world. He went to a garden, and he had what we might think of as the most clearly human moments of his life. The Hebrew writer says he learned obedience in those moments as he called out to God, as he pleaded with God, the Father, for him to take the cup away. But of course, he also showed his divinity and his oneness and his perfect obedience in those moments as he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And as he was in agony, in a kind of stress and sorrow that I have never gone through, I have a hard time fully imagining the kind of stress that doctors talk about how this might be a phenomenon that he was experiencing that is documented, but he was sweating drops of blood. His sweat was bleeding. Blood was coming out. I mean, it was just such a strain on him. And he had gone away to have these moments with his Father in private. And when he came back to his friends, James and John and Peter, he found them sleeping. And in Matthew 26, in verse 40, it says that he came to the disciples, he found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour?" And he says this directive, which has lasted down and been repeated by Christians as something that we take to heart. He said, "Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." The Spirit being our spirit, not the Holy Spirit. The Spirit is willing. Our spirits are willing, but our flesh, our bodies are weak. And so he says, watch and pray. And the temptation surely there is not just about trying not to sleep. Jesus knows what is going to come about, and he knows what they are going to go through, these disciples. And already he is wanting to look out for them and the temptation to give up and to fail. At least that's how I understand this passage. And so he tells them, watch and pray. Watch and pray. This word watch, appropriately to them falling asleep, and the word that we find later of watchfulness or being watchful, for instance, in Colossians 4 and verse 2, to be watchful, to pray continually with watchfulness and thanksgiving. That word might also be translated awake. In fact, it is translated awake in 1 Thessalonians 5, where it talks about, Paul talks about those who are asleep at Jesus' coming and those who are awake. And it's translated, same word, translated awake. It could be translated alert. In 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, in talking about Satan and him being a prowling lion roaring around, it's translated sober-minded. I asked the Zoom group on Sunday night, or on Tuesday night, to define some words that, if we were to draw a circle here and say, this is watchfulness, what words would help us understand watchfulness, and what words are out here, as in not watchfulness? And some of the words out here were things like distraction. Have you ever been distracted? Who isn't half the time these days, right? It's so easy to get distracted. Or when you understand the weight and significance of what you're being called to be watchful about, and then you're distracted, Dave said, well, I would call that negligence. If we put in here this idea that we see in that meaning of that word of awake, then over here we could say sleepwalking, coasting, drifting. A lot of times there's some buzzwords that you hear today that people use, secular people, that are very closely tied to this biblical concept of watchfulness. Things like awareness, intentionality, even something you hear people talk about a lot, important idea, presence, or the idea of just being not distracted from what you're doing, but being present to the kid that you're talking to or to the job that you're doing, presence. We talked about alertness and soberness. I remember when I was a kid, we didn't take vacations so much as we went once every year or two from Phoenix to Ohio to be with family. That was our vacation. Never went to Disney World or anything like that, but it was like family time. That's vacation time. And it's a long drive from Phoenix to Ohio. And my dad would drive like 92% of it, like almost all of it, but my mom would force him to the back seat. We had this super cab truck that we would lay a mattress down in the back seat, and he would lay down. And when Dad was driving, because he was driving so long, and it was 4 in the morning, every once in a while, you'd hear, bum, 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 bum. And, and you get back on track, right? And maybe, occasionally, maybe even recently, you have found yourself spiritually kind of fallen asleep at the wheel. And maybe you've even experienced something in your life that was like a bump, 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 bump. That was like a, wait a minute. I could have lost everything right there. I could have lost my soul right there. I could have lost my marriage right there. I could have, what was I thinking? I was drifting into a path I don't want to drift into. I could have gotten entrenched in a new habit that I do not want to be in. Sometimes whenever Mom finally talked Dad into getting into the back seat, and Dad would be laying down, there would just be, the slightest tap on the brake or pulling to change lanes, and Dad would sit up immediately. He's been sitting back there for 20 minutes, but he's not sleeping. He's, in his mind, he's the captain of this ship. And he is tuned in to what's happening, and it's hard to let go. I talked last Sunday night about Jesus in the boat sleeping. And yet was Jesus ever completely tuned out to the stakes and the consequences, to the important things that were going on? Was he and everyone with him in danger of losing their lives in that storm? No. There's a passage from a book. It's by David White, called Crossing the Unknown Sea. And this passage has been very meaningful to me at times. It's not a religious book. It's on work and finding meaning and bringing awareness and intentionality to the work that you're doing. And he has this section where he doesn't use the word watchfulness. he talks about it with this word, captaincy. And so he tells this story about a time when he was in the Galapagos Islands, and he was on this ship. He was working as a crew of this ship, and he almost lost his life. The captain was in his cabin asleep, and no one was paying attention as they started to drift and run into some rocks that almost destroyed the ship. And so he says this, "After our near disaster beneath the cliff face, how did I see the captain's failure? It had everything to do with being in hiding. Somehow this new captain, whose professional world was made up of his maritime experience, the boat, its itinerary, its crew, its passengers, and the wild elements that surrounded it, had allowed his attention to retreat into an insulated room inside himself that had no connection with the immediacy of his outer world. In the rough territory of the Galapagos, washed by the restless sea, the result was a neglect and forgetfulness, a sleep in which others could die." And skipping down, he says, "It's not that a captain cannot sleep, but even in sleep, there should be a cultivated attentiveness, which is essential at sea. It is something akin to the way we can wake ourselves at a specific time for an important occasion, even if we've forgotten to set the bedside alarm. Except this is a continuous alertness, accessible even in the deepest modes of sleep. Every turn of the tide or the weather is important. A good captain wakes as soon as the wind veers or the rhythm of the waves lapping at the hull increases." And my dad sits up. "What's going on, Nancy?" he might say. We have a captaincy of our ship. And we have actually not just our own, but multiple lives that are affected by the way we bring our captaincy to our ship. And so we have to learn, because you can't stay in that stress tension of battle at all moments. We have to learn a relaxed alertness where we can stay attentive like a soldier on watch over long periods of time. Sustained attention. It's kind of like, you ever see a martial arts expert and they get in their position and they looked relaxed, but they are so ready. Or when Aaron used to play tennis, you're ready and then you're ready for the serve, right? And as soon as the serve comes, you're ready to move, but you're also relaxed. If you're too tense, then it throws everything off. We have to be able to be not full of anxiety and worry and fear, at rest in Jesus, but not asleep. Never asleep. Never asleep. Because as soon as we think, and I have done this lately, thought, okay, this was an extended period of effort and work. I just need to go into vacation mode for a little bit, for like a day. But there's no days, there's days of rest and there's days that we take things off, but we don't take our alertness off. We need to bring our spiritual disciplines, our prayer and our scripture reading and our time in the Word, our time in meditating on the things that matter to every day. We need to bring an awareness of what's happening around us to each moment. So this is part of our cross-training series. And we'll do this much more quickly than we normally do. But as we focus in on this mark of the master, watchfulness, in all of these, we try to start with what is the truth that the scriptures reveal to us that change and become the foundation for these attitudes. And then what is the state of the heart we need to have and the actions, and then how does that affect the way we relate to others? And when we think of watchfulness, it starts with spiritual awareness, and then goes to readiness and resisting the devil and wisdom. What do I mean by spiritual awareness? I mean that we walk by faith and not by sight. I mean that not just when we're here and we know the Lord's presence is with us and there's a lot that we are trying to focus on that has spiritual implications, but anytime when we're watching the ball game, when we're driving to work, when whatever's going on, we recognize there are spiritual forces that oppose us, that are trying to bring us down. There are angels that are ministering spirits. There are stakes. There is an eternal consequence to things. And that there is a God who is for us and there to support us and help us. And so, as in Ephesians 1:15-23, Paul often says things like, I pray that your eyes, the eyes of your faith may be opened, or the eyes of your heart may be opened, that you can see what's really going on. You can have an awareness of what's really happening. And then with that awareness, the more we see that, the more we develop a sense of readiness, a sense of always kind of being on the edge, sitting on the edge of our seats. And 1 Peter, we won't read these passages, but 1 Peter has this theme of readiness throughout it. 1 Peter 1 talks about having a level of readiness to obey the Lord. 1 Peter 3, verses 14-16 talks about having a readiness to give an answer to people when they ask about the hope within us. 1 Peter 4 talks about not being surprised at the fiery trials that come among us. Don't be surprised, be ready. And then 1 Peter 5, as I mentioned earlier, verses 8 and 9, talks about having this sober mind ready for the attacks of the evil one. And that leads to this third aspect, resisting the devil. That at some point, it's not a matter of being ready, it's a matter of being in the fight. There are things that we surrender to, as we sang this morning. There is a God that we surrender to, and there is one that we resist. So James 4:7 says, resist the devil and submit to God, surrender to God. And so we need to be ready for that fight. And then in all of this, whenever our eyes are open, whenever we're watchful, in our interactions with others and everything we do, this leads to wisdom. And I want to invite you to turn in your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 5. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce a new song to you guys from this passage. And I'd like us to look at this. In Ephesians chapter 5, he starts out by saying, not to let anyone deceive you with empty words. And he talks about the deeds of darkness. And you are now, it doesn't say in the light, you are now light in the Lord. So walk as children of light. Verse 9, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. When we're aware, what are we alert to? What are we thinking about? What does our spiritual awareness lead to? Discerning what's pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. Often whenever Paul talks about light and dark, he folds in a metaphor of you sleep in the darkness and you wake up in the day. And then sometimes, like in Romans 13, he says, and the day, the true and complete day, is coming. And in light of that, we are children of light. That is, often when Jesus emphasizes watchfulness, and when Paul emphasizes watchfulness, It's in light of the coming of the Lord. And it's interesting, if you watch for it, he's not saying, watch for the coming of the Lord. He's saying, watch your life in light of the coming of the Lord. Stay attentive. We're not watching the skies. We're keeping our hearts with all vigilance. We're watching how we're interacting with people. We're seeking to live holy lives in light of the coming day. And then he says, for anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. It is believed that this is, a lot of people believe, scholars believe, that this may have been an early song that was sung whenever a Christian was baptized into Christ. Just because of the poetic nature, it seems like maybe he's quoting something they're familiar with. Maybe it was a song, and the nature of it seems like that kind of a song. Awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Something for the new Christian or the person who's not a Christian to hear. But isn't that something that you and I need to hear? Again and again and again. Awake, O sleeper. Arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. He says, look carefully then how you walk. Be circumspect. Look around. Watch your steps. Take care in how you walk, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Redeem the time. Trade it in for something good. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So, as we draw the lesson to a close, I want to invite all of you to sing a new song with me. And a few of you know it. I know I've sung it with a few of you. And if you know it, join in right away, but you will pick it up right away. We're going to sing this verse from Ephesians 5 7 times. And just join in, okay? And when we sing it, kind of like whenever we said a month ago or whenever it was, whenever we said, the loving kindness of the Lord endures forever. Each time you sing these words, say it to one another and say it to yourself and hear it. Robert gave us this profound question from the Lord and his time with his conversation with the rich young ruler. You know, what do you lack? And maybe you, like me, found that a time of real reflection on where do I need to grow? And I would encourage you to continue that thought process and just ask, is there something in me, some area of my life that I need to bring attention, and awareness, and intention, and alertness to, watchfulness to? And as we watch in prayer before the Lord. Watching and praying, those two always go together. Well, let's sing this. Seth or Landon, should I turn this off and switch it to that other? You got it? Okay.
Wake up, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Wake up, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Wake up, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Wake up, O
If you're ready to be a Christian, please come while we stand and sing.